Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. It's Tanner Leeser, your host for The King in Giallo. This is episode 2 of the Forgotten Giallo film series, 1964, part 2. And I've got a couple more gialli I'd like to highlight, as always thanks in no small part to Troy Howard's book on Giallo cinema, So Deadly, So Perverse, 50 Years of Italian Giallo Films, Volume 1, 1963 to 1973. Like this video and subscribe to The King in Giallo, and do ring that notification bell so that those lords of the algorithm may bestow their blessing upon me, and you continue to be presented with weekly Giallo content. Onto the video. Our third film featured for 1964, first of two for this video, is 1964's Dark Purpose. This came out after Blood and Blacklace. Other names include L'Intrigo, La Intriga, Im Garten des Verderbens, and Cora Must Die. The film was directed by George Marshall and Vittorio Sala, written for the screen by Massimo de Avac and David P. Harmon, and based upon the book written by Doris Hume Kilburn. The main actors in the film are Shirley Jones, Rossano Barazzi, George Sanders, Giorgia Moll, and Micheline Prel. The plot of the film begins with Count Paolo Barbarelli, Brazzi, inviting Raymond and Karen, George Sanders and Shirley Jones, to his Italian chateau, or palazzo, to appraise his extensive art collection. In typical fashion, a forbidden romance begins between the Count and Karen, with Raymond becoming justifiably suspicious of Cora, a strange girl wandering about in her own world. Cora is said by the Count to be his daughter, suffering from severe brain damage after an unfortunate skiing accident. However, Cora claims that she is actually the Count's wife, and there is more hidden away in her damaged and fragile psyche, but she cannot remember, try as she might. There is an interesting collaborative period in both American and Italian filmmaking, beginning in the 1950s and ending in the late 1960s. During this time, American directors would come to Rome to film while exploiting both the exotic locales and the Italian labor, which was regarded as both cheaper while also being considerably skilled for the price. Unfortunately for the Italian laborers in this arrangement, they would be worked tirelessly and to the bone. Before the whole thing ended, some majorly successful films like Ben-Hur, 1959, and El Cid, 1961, would sell out cinemas on both sides of the Atlantic. However, a few costly flops would spoil the arrangement and sour the relationship between the two, with the Italians feeling used and left for dead by the Hollywood types. During this period, though, it was very common to find American directors working in tandem with Italian directors, although the dynamics of these collaborations varied from picture to picture. Sometimes this relationship was relegated to the American director handling the stars, the divas, and the leading men and their egos, while the Italian director serving as the go-between for the Italian-speaking laborers and technicians. Sadly, sometimes the relationship would simply be an Italian director in the credits as co-director just to satisfy a quota. Dark Purpose would be billed as George Marshall on US posters and Vittorio Sala on the Italian ones. While Howarth mentions that Dark Purpose barely fills the criteria to be treated as a giallo, saying it's more old-fashioned, he notes that the more macabre tones of the final act rank up with some of the gialli that came both before and long after it. He also draws parallels to The Girl Who Knew Too Much, 1963, and this film's use of the American abroad trope and acting as a precursor to later gialli inspired by Clouseau's Les Diaboliques, 1955. Howarth goes on to remark on the plot being simple and predictable enough, but in the hands of Marshall and Sala, the film is able to develop in both a stylish and engaging manner. Howarth gives the film due credit to its well-written and acted trio of main characters. The Count is charming, perhaps too much, and if one is familiar with Giallo cinema, they should deduce that he is a wolf in sheep's clothing, a snake in the grass. Karen is unique for being the damsel in distress. She is not too dense, and she has a bright intellect. Raymond T. Fontaine is fabulously sardonic and irreverent, and cares for Karen more than he will speak of, and is the kind of chap that rises to the gauntlet of hero when adversity comes a-knockin'. The plot and characters alone make for an enjoyable and unique viewing, but the fans of Giallo interested in sex and violence may not find it so charming. Shirley Jones appears in her only Giallo role. She would go on to be known as the lead in the Partridge Family series, 1970-74, but her career-defining performance came in 1960's Elmer Gantry, directed by Richard Brooks, where she acted opposite Burt Lancaster and where Shelley won an Oscar. Rossano Brazzi performed in Mevin Leroy's Little Women, 1949, Joseph L. Mankiewicz's The Barefoot Contessa, 1954, David Lean's Summertime, 1955, and Joshua Logan's South Pacific, 1958. Brazzi would often find himself acting in smaller parts in big pictures and leading parts in B-movies. In 1969, Brazzi would direct his own Giallo, Psych Out for Murder, where he also played one of the lead parts. George Sanders played leading roles in the 1930s and won an Oscar in Joseph L. Mankiewicz's All About Eve, 1950. Sanders is seen in films such as Hitchcock's Rebecca, 1940, and Foreign Correspondent, 1940, and Fritz Lang's Manhunt, 1941, Moonfleet, 1955, and While the City Sleeps, 1956. In 1954, Sanders began appearing in Italian films, starting with Roberto Rossellini's Journey to Italy. Sadly, due to failing health and loss of hearing, forcing him to be unable to accurately pick up on his cues, Sanders ended his life in 1972. Director George Marshall debuted behind the camera in 1916, hitting success in the 1930s, and ending his career in film in the 1970s. He did some television before passing away in 1975. Vittorio Sala, not nearly as prolific as Marshall, did work extensively in documentaries, but it seems he was only brought on board to help facilitate communications with the Italian crew members. Dark Purpose may be a minor title in the Giallo genre, but it remains a charming and enjoyable one, which is directed smoothly and is effective in delivering its final climax. I cannot find a US home video release for Dark Purpose, although the movie is available to stream online in its entirety. On to the next film. The next 1964 forgotten Giallo film is Death on the Four-Poster, directed by Jean Josepovice and Ambrogio Morteni, and written by Jean Josepovice. The film was also called Delitto allo Spricchio, Sexy Party, and Le Possédé du Démon. The film stars John Drew Barrymore as Anthony, Gloria Milland as Franca, Michel Lemoyne as Riccardo, Luisa Rivelli as Caterina, Antonella Lualdi as Serena, and Mario Valdemarin as Carlo. The plot follows Riccardo inviting his friends to his chateau for the weekend. Serena ends up arriving later with Anthony, her new beau. Anthony, it turns out, has extrasensory abilities, and the group convinces him eventually to tell the future. Anthony, in typical Giallo fashion, foresees violent death and attempts to urge the others to flee with him. The confident young adults shake off his warnings and vote to stay, and soon enough, a murder follows. This is one of those Italian films that exists between the realms of Giallo and Gothic. Not too unfamiliar, although the use of black and white cinematography, although beautiful, makes the film feel more old-fashioned. The movie delivers on the sleaze, though it seems to promise more than what it actually delivers, yet each actress does end up in her underwear. There is also an oddly bizarre moment where someone tears at the dress of one of the women. With a thin plot and sketchy characterization, the film does succeed in preemptively doing the psychic foretelling scene done masterfully over 10 years later in Deep Red. The movie retains a lot of holdovers from the Gothic film era, with characters skulking about in dim corridors, which ends up comprising more screen time than most would care to watch. Death on the Four-Poster is the type of Giallo that attempts to make every character a red herring, practically to its detriment, bordering on camp, with a pacing progressing slower than fingernail growth and a resolution which hardly amounts to much. The film is co-directed by Josepovice and Molteni Yet it seems that Molteni was only billed to fill quotas. Joseph-Povice, a Frenchman, only directed a small handful of films between 1954 and 1964, and this was his last. This is the only directing credit for Molteni. The assistant director on the film, Demofilo Fidani, would go on to be called the Italian Ed Wood for some of his horrendously received spaghetti westerns, but also a single giallo. A masseuse, good-looking, offers her services, 1972, which I must say takes the prize for the worst giallo title I've ever encountered so far. Howarth describes the cast as being as uninspiring as the material. John Drew Barrymore, the son of a great stage actor, lends his name to the picture more than any acting chops. He did have some success in earlier decades, such as Fritz Lang's When the City Sleeps, but any promise he may have cultivated for himself was lost by the time he began acting in European pictures. He racked up a lot of off-screen controversy, notably with his illicit drug use. French actor Michel Lemoyne chews the scenery and attempts to infuse overacting as a means to convey more intensity into the action. Lemoyne would work with Mario Bava in The Road to Fort Alamo, 1962. He is best known for his work in cult films, appearing in a Jess Franco trilogy, as well as his own directing credits. Lemoyne would appear in one more giallo, Run, Psycho, Run, 1968, appearing alongside his wife, actress Janine Renaud, who also shared the screen with him in the aforementioned Franco trilogy. Antonella Lualdi perhaps is the best actor in the flick, although she exits the action rather early. This remains the only giallo for Antonella. Death on the Four-Poster is also unavailable on any US home video release, but can likewise be found streaming online. Thanks for watching part 2 of the Forgotten Giallo films of 1964. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are indeed horror fans or cinephiles, and subscribe to The King in Giallo if you have not yet. And if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comments section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. I hope you learned something new. If you are interested in watching these movies, look them up online and you should find the films streaming in their entirety. If you do watch them or have already seen them, I invite you to leave your thoughts on them in the comments. Upcoming content on The King in Giallo will be the overview for Ernesto Gastaldi's 1965 Perotto Giallo, Libido, Part 3 of the Forgotten Giallo Films 1964 series, and the review and Gialli Tally video for Blood and Black Lace. Thank you all very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
Let's see what he can do with these metal. Cut it out, Jones. Cut it out. Hold everything. Take a look at that.
Ooh, another mirror.
What a...
You like that, huh?
What possibilities.
You're right.